Hello everyone, welcome to the International Symposium on Diversity and Energy Transition. I hope you're having a great time. And I'm Anoki Mehta from Energy Club IIT Bombay, and I will be moderating the next session. I would love to introduce our next speaker, Professor Haripriya Gundimeda. Professor Haripriya currently works at the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences at the Indian Institute of Technology, Bombay. Her research work specializes in developmental economics, energy economics, environmental economics, green accounting, economics of biodiversity, and climate change. She also serves as an office holder at the International Union of Forest Research Organization. She will be presenting her views on the challenges and opportunities in the green economy in the world. Before I hand over to her, I hope all of y'all are by now familiar with the Q&A channel. And for those of you who have joined recently, all the questions will be answered at the end of the session. And in case you have any questions, you can always ask them in the Q&A channel. And if you really like someone else's question, do upvote it because preference will be given to the questions with the higher number of upvotes. Handing over to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am, you're audible.
So I need to share my screen. Well, just a minute. I'm unable to share my screen, I guess. Just a minute.
Yes, we can see your screen. You're muted, ma'am.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes,
ma'am,
ma'am.
we can hear you.
So the topic I'm going to speak today is on transition to a green economy, challenges and opportunities. Okay. As you have introduced me as a faculty of economics, so my talk would be a bit more on the economic side. I hope that's all okay with all of you, though it would be more non-technical because the reason why I thought I should introduce this topic from the perspective of economics is you're talking about a green economy. And I thought it's very important for all of us to understand what has got green to do with the economy, right? So I would try and put that in the context of the economy, the economic growth, and then the role of like what kind of challenges do you encounter if you want to actually green the economy. So now trying to understand what is green economy. Okay, you must have come across different definitions of green economy. One is the most common definition is by the UNEP, which is like, which all of us know. They defined a green economy as one that results in improved well-being and social equity, while significantly reducing environmental risk and ecological scarcities. Okay, so because there are many different definitions and how we understand the green economy is very important for all of us. And there is also one more definition of green economy, which talks about a low carbon, resource efficient, and socially inclusive. Okay, so you know what is low carbon and you know what is resource efficient. Being able to basically being able to produce one unit with the least resources. So that's basically called as resource efficient. And then socially inclusive, wherein it includes all sections of the population. Okay, so that kind of economy is basically what is green. And so in this kind of economy, the growth in employment and income are basically driven by the economic activities, infrastructure and assets that allow reduce carbon emissions and pollution. Okay, so any economic activity will not actually cause too much of pollution. And along with that, there is like enhanced energy and resource efficiency. Maybe there is a scope for recycling, reuse, and reuse of the materials, recycling of energy or zero energy or whatever, right? And then the prevention of, along with that, the economy also talks about prevention of the loss of biodiversity and ecosystem services. That's one definition, which is most often, this is the one which is actually being taken, because when you talk about the energy transitions, that's where this kind of economy comes into play. And then, but then you also like this particular term green economy is often used in the context of green growth. Because OECD, for example, talks about the green growth. Basically, what you talk about is fostering economic growth and development while ensuring that the natural assets continue to provide the resources and environmental services for our well-being. So that's basically the green growth. That means you want your economy to be growing, but at the same time, you want to make sure that your environment is intact. So that's basically the green growth. And that's what OECD talks about. And then you have another international, the World Bank. They talk about green growth as basically it's a qualitative growth and it's efficient in its use of natural resources, clean in that it minimizes pollution and environmental damages, and resilient in that it basically minimizes natural hazard, explains the natural hazards. So what definition, how we understand green economy is very important. And all this whole term green economy is put in the context of in the Rio Plus 20 conference in after 20 years after Rio in 1992. So that's basically the future we want. That's the title of the conference. And that's where the term green economy has come into play. Now, is this like, though we are talking green economy as if this is something new, but that is actually not new. We have in the past, this particular term has been introduced since time immemorial. We have some good history about the green economy. For example, the earliest anecdote one can see is, you can see the written documentary evidence from Kautilya's actually Arthashastra. And he actually distinguished between land and forest in Arthashastra, and he also proposed sustainability criteria for land and forest management. That's where he actually used this term. Green economy is basically what is sustainability of the resources and the management of the resources. And then this Greek philosopher, the Chinese philosopher Confucius, he also talked about the reform in price and management. Okay, so he talked about that the true price of the natural resources should be offered, and the modern thinking of the sustainability reforms actually dwells on this model. By meaning the true price, all of you must be knowing in the economics that there is an equilibrium between the demand and supply. So there should not be any inefficiency in the market. That should be the market clearing price. If something is short in supply, the price should automatically go up. But then it should be like price through a market mechanism. So that's basically the true price. So that's basically what is meant by the sustainable management of the resource or sustainable development. Then there is Adam Smith. He is called the father of economics, and he talked about a balanced approach between moral philosophy and economic development. And his idea is that one needs to balance the self-interest with the social justice. So that's basically like that's the concept of sustainable development or development and of the environment and the society. Then comes the neoclassical economics, wherein this is what we are all very familiar with. So what, even as engineers or we are only concerned about the production and the consumption, right? So there is a circular flow model, like whatever we produce is consumed, and then whatever is like, the even the consumers become the producers, and we also like offer our services to produce some goods. And we also like the firms actually produce goods and services for our consumption. So that's basically a circular flow model. And then this is basically the economic growth oriented development. Here, what happens is you're trying to balance labor and capital as the main drivers of sustainable development. So here, what is happening is you're only concerned about your production and consumption. You're not talking about any of the environment over here. So that leads to excessive production and consumption, and there is a mismatch between the economy and the environment over here. And then in 1992, the Rio Earth Summit had come in, because once you figured out that whatever is the neoclassical, there's excessive production and there's a lot of waste and we are producing a lot of pollution, and most of the evils of the environment are because of this um, growth models which did not actually take into account of the environment. Then came the Brundtland Commission in 1987, and then wherein in the Rio Earth Summit, we first time coined the term sustainable development, and that's where it has been emphasized for the need to develop without compromising the ability of the future generation to meet their needs. That means you use your resources. We are not saying don't use your resources, but then you use your resources in such a way that even the future generations are not impacted. So the whole 2 decades after the Earth Summit, so there was so much of thrust on the sustainable development, but then when it came to the measurement of the sustainable development, it became a little bit more complicated. And then so when after 2 decades, when they wanted to take stock of like whether or not the growth has been sustainable or whatever, then they coined the new term has been coined called as green economy. It's basically, it's maybe kind of a new version of sustainable development, but then little bit more, which has a broader connotations. So it's nothing new, but then we are actually talking about the same idea since last 3 decades now. Okay, sustainable development, green economy, and all that. Now, I want to the reason why this is such an important topic, and we need to understand the economy, the Indian economy especially, is if you talk about, we have, I'm not covering any period before 1991, because in 1991, India had actually gone through a major set of reforms. We opened our borders. Now we have started to trade with other countries. So it's so that's basically the point of transition for the Indian economy. And so and even when I talk about green economy, is basically another structural transformation, just like the liberalization. And especially in this age of pandemic, it is very essential for us to understand what has been the experience of the Indian context in the context of what has been achieved in the past, right? Now, if you look at this graph, and as you know, all the nations would like to grow. All of us would like to have double-digit GDP. The GDP economy should be growing, because if the economy grows, then we'd have more jobs, the workforce will be absorbed, and all that. So any thrust of the nation would be to grow and also improve various other indicators, you look at the industrial production growth. We have the current account deficit, fiscal deficit. All of these are indicators of how well the economy is doing. Now, if you just look at this particular figure, you see that the Indian GDP has actually substantially changed from between 1991 to the last 2018. So you see that it has increased 5.5 times since 1991. So the GDP is basically this line, the gray line here. You see that, yes, the GDP has increased quite a bit. And along with that, you also see that the parameters of the industrial production has also increased, and everything has actually is on the positive side. Now, Indian economy has been growing at the rate of 5.6%, between 91 and 2000, and 6.75% between 2001 and 2010. That's the time when the growth has been maximum. And then it actually also like stabilized at 6.82% between 2011 to 2018, right? So that's the GDP story. And then also, like, if you look at the fiscal deficit, basically the government revenue and the net of expenditure, the target has been very much below 3%, and we have achieved that to 2.54% in 2007 itself. So that basically tells that the government is able to generate more taxes. They are able to come, definitely, like only when you earn, then you would be able to pay taxes. When consumers consume, they would be able to pay taxes. So the revenue paying ability of the nation has also increased, right? Then also comes the current, the account deficit, which also net exports minus imports. And if you see that particular figure also, like have been like the trade balance has been pretty good. So we have been able to cap it at roughly 3%. And so that's also like, so most of the indicators, so you have defined a target for the economy, and we have been able to do well given that target, with a set of structural reforms, we call it. These are the economic reforms that we have initiated. Okay, so now if you just look at, and also like Indian economy would like some, because we have opened our borders, and so we definitely need more people to invest in our economy. Now, so there is like the FDI, the foreign direct investment. Countries are coming, nations are coming, the MNCs come and invest in our country. And you see this particular one, the FDI as a percent of GDP has peaked up in 2008. So that's a reason why, like, you have many MNCs, and most of you would like also like to take up a job in a MNC. And so that's the situation has been fairly good. Okay, so there has been the flow of trade and FDI, and the GDP percentage has increased. Now, why I'm telling all this, because I'm just going by the definition of the green economy. Now, when we're talking about the green economy, now if the economy is doing well, now are we also satisfying the other criteria of, like, the environment also, are we taking care of? Are we taking care of the social equity? Are we achieving the social dimensions as well? Is that an important issue, right? Now, this particular figure gives you the trends in Human Development Index. Now, Human Development Index is an indicator of development, as the word indicates. So growth is different. Growth is just like how much income has grown from year on year. But then when we talk about the development, is overall development, in the sense like the quality of life, whether you have access to education, whether you have access to good health care, whether you have access to, whether your life expectancy is larger or not. So if you just look at the Human Development Index, this is the world development, the blue line, and India is somewhere here, and it is much below the developing countries. That means though we have achieved the growth has been on a positive side. When you look at the development side, what is happening here is that the development, we are still very low. The reason why, there are some implications, because this indicator also includes life expectancy, it indicates education. So there are various facets on which, like, we still needs to improve, right? Because India is a large populous country. So we have a lot to achieve over here. Okay. Now, I will talk about, so along with the other set of reforms, the structural reforms, India has also like undergone like some energy reforms in India, because this is the one which is very important for energy transition. Now, what have things changed over the past, right? Earlier people were using fuel wood, then we moved on to kerosene, then we moved on to LPG regime. Then we were used to the subsidies, and there's so much of shortages of LPG as well. Not everybody was having access to subsidy or the LPG. And also, like, as I showed you in the earlier graph, India has had huge fiscal deficit. Fiscal deficit in the sense, the amount of revenue collected by the government, net of the expenditure incurred by the government, has been pretty large. It has been the expenditure has been higher than the income received. Why has been the expenditure higher than the income received is one of the reason has been the energy subsidies. Okay, Indian government used to give huge subsidy because energy is a necessity. We cannot stay without, we cannot definitely do anything without energy. So there are a lot of fuel subsidies given by the government, and it has had like significant impact on the fiscal deficit, right? So in 2010, there have been some series of reforms which have been initiated. And one such set of reform has been like talking about the fuel subsidy reforms for 4 fuels mostly. They are petrol, diesel, kerosene, and LPG. So the reforms talked about the phase subsidy reforms. That means gradually phase out the subsidies. And so that, you see the extent of the subsidies which the Indian government has given. It has been 1,72,333 crores. That has been the extent of the fossil fuel subsidies in India. And that has been gradually reduced from that amount to around 52,980 crores in financial year 2017. Imagine if somebody has access, as I said, pricing is a crucial thing. Now, if you have to buy certain LPG cylinders, say for 600 rupees, vis-a-vis I spend 250 rupees on a cylinder, my energy conservation would be a lot more when I pay higher amounts. So that automatically has an impact for the energy conservation over here, right? So that's basically what the reforms are. So there have been 4 fuels targeted, and these subsidy reforms have had huge impetus for the energy transition in the country. The second major reform which has been carried out in India is the opening of market to energy players. Okay, earlier it has been mostly the domestic players, but after that it has been opened up. And so in July 2000, the Indian government partially deregulated the price of petrol, and they allowed oil marketing companies to align domestic prices with the international prices on fortnightly basis. And that's the reason why, because of this deregulation of the prices, you see the price adjustments happening every now and then in the petrol and the diesel sector. The third important regulation is about the diesel price regulation. Okay. So if you increase the price suddenly, people would be impacted. So what the government did was to gradually raise the prices of diesel fuel by 50 paise each month since January 2013. And then they had formally ended the diesel price regulation in 2014. That means they have phased out the subsidies on diesel as well completely. There's 2 implications. Diesel is a dirty fuel. And so it would definitely have a positive impact on the climate change and the emissions, right? So that's one of the reform that the government has brought in. And in 2012, they also like LPG is mostly used for cooking. And so from the transport fuels, they came to the cooking fuels. So they actually has put a cap on the consumption of the number of cylinders at a subsidized rate to the households. Earlier, it used to be 6, then they had increased to 12. But then after that, the subsidies were eliminated, and again, the prices were actually high gradually. And then they also like launched something called as a direct benefit transfer scheme in 2013. That means like if I am a beneficiary, instead of giving the subsidy would be directly transferred to the bank, so that you are able to know who the beneficiary is. A high income person will not, because most of the reasons why we say that subsidies are essential is because they would hurt the poor badly. But if I'm rich, I'm able to afford, then why should I be given a subsidy, right? So that actually enabled direct identification of the beneficiary. And so through the Give It Up initiative, that means like, if I don't require subsidy, I say no to it. So I will not get any money in the bank price. So right now, it's only the targeted, the poor who gets this direct benefit transfer. Most of the rich are basically either voluntarily or compulsorily, they are eliminated from this subsidy. So that basically made the LPG available to more number of people. So the accessibility has increased because of that. And the other important change that the government has brought in is the kerosene price reform. There is this public distribution system wherein kerosene is also given at a subsidized rate to the poor people, because in rural areas people do depend on kerosene still for lighting because the power supply is erratic, right? So the in July 2016, that also like PDS kerosene by increased by 25 paisa per liter each fortnight. And now they have ensured with a view to reducing subsidies and their burden. So the reform, they brought the reforms even in the kerosene. So mostly this energy reforms, this led to the increase in the prices of the fuels. That's a key take home point. Now, the moment like the prices of certain fuel, right now, the price of petrol is like 100 rupees per liter. Now, the amount of trips, or we actually travel only if it is absolutely essential, right? So we just do not travel. So that's automatically induces change in behavior in the people. So this has impetus for the kind and how much of the fuel we use, how much of the energy we use. But other thing, so along with these reforms, what happened to the environment side is something, whether these reforms, energy reforms or energy transition is required. Are we really achieving, like though we are talking about the green economy, have we really achieved the green economy? In order to understand that, we also need to understand the environment side of the story. Now, what happened to the environment? Because like our economy has been doing well. We have got this set of reforms. We try to change the consumption pattern of people through increasing the prices of the fuels. But then what happened to the environment side? Now, if you just look at what is the implication on, say, the forests, you will see mostly like we have different categories of forests, like dense forests, open forests, and you also have the total cropped area, etc. And you see that the forest area has actually declined. So that's, and also the people also are, though like agriculture is a primary sector in India even now, but the extent of land which has been experienced desertification, and there is a lot of lack of soil, and because of the climate change, there's been a lot of problem with the agricultural sector as well, right? The extent of irrigated area is increasing. That means we are dependent more on the irrigation now, and either due to the falling water tables or because of people are going for two crops, right? So that's basically the impact on the land use, because if your economy is growing, obviously it would impact the other side, which is the environment side. Now, if it is impacting the environment side, that means we are not achieving the objectives of the green economy, right? And then this particular figure, you see the extent of the desertification and land degradation status in India. This is for the period 2003-5, and this is 2011 to 13 period. You see here, definitely vegetation has been degrading, the water erosion, wind erosion, these are all the basic problems, water logging, total area and desertification. It actually has increased after 2011 drastically. That's a huge concern. If the area is basically becoming more that means like it's a productive area is declining. Now the area cannot be used for any of the cropping patterns, and this would have implication for the food security of the nation. Now, how are we going to feed the growing population is a big question, right? So, and then, as I mentioned, like Indian economy has opened up the borders, and we have grown. It has really had a positive impact on the Indian manufacturing sector. But the key question is, what kind of sectors have we opened up, or industries have we opened up? If you just look at this particular figure, we identify the industries. For example, there are certain heavily polluting industries, like you have sugar, pharmaceutical products, tanneries, chemicals, fertilizers, iron and steel, organic chemicals, tanning or dyeing extracts, lead and article syrup. You see this, all this. Now the share of the dirty industries in the total exports have been increasing. So that means while we have opened the borders, we have invited the FDI, we have invited, what happened to our environmental side of the story is that we have had lax environmental regulations. We let them actually come to our country, and then actually the pollution levels have increased. Okay. So these are the dirty industries. And so we have been exporting these products of the dirty industries. So the exports, while the current account balance has increased, but it has been coming from the dirty industries. That means we are polluting our own environment. So economy is doing pretty well, but the environmental side of the story gets a negative mark over here, right? So that's a key thing. So this particular figure tells you about by how much we have increased the pollution levels in the country because of production of the dirty chemicals. Now, so what are the implications of all of these? Now, as you know, we have the water quality now. Any of the production, obviously, where the effluents go, they would all let into the water bodies. And this is just an example of our two largest rivers and important rivers in the country, Ganga and Yamuna. So you see the trends of BOD and COD, and you see that they have been like, okay, though we say that this is the permissible level in Ganga, this is before 1991, and we are well above the permissible levels here, if you just look at over here in 2013. So you see that the pollution now, all the Ganga as well as Yamuna, before 1990, this is the years when we had the data. So you see that it is well above the permissible levels for Ganga and Yamuna in terms of BOD, which is very bad side of the story, right? So that means our rivers are polluted, and where do we get water from? And then it also impacts the health. So GDP may be growing, but then it may be growing because our health has actually deteriorated. So this is, our production is coming up with the waste generation, right? Which is once again not honoring the conduct of the green economy story. Now you see here waste tons per day in various metropolitan cities. It's actually pretty high. So we are actually producing more waste than the economy can actually treat. We need technologies to treat this, right? So that means if you have to achieve the green economy, you need to be able to produce something with minimal waste. How are we going to achieve is a huge challenge. And then we also, this is the figure about the PM particulate matter and the NOx for metropolitan cities in India. And we see that most of our cities are quite polluted, right? We are much above the permissible levels, which also means that we would have definitely problems with the health in terms of we would have more respiratory illnesses. So it would be a kind of a suffering nation. Now we are seeing the impact of the pandemic and poor air quality, how much, I mean, you can't believe we have been buying oxygen, right? We imported oxygen. And so that's because our air is no longer fresh to breathe in as well. So there are also increase in airborne diseases in India. So if you look at the number of deaths per thousand, this is, they're definitely increased between 1990 and 2016, right? So that's as a result of the environment side of the story, wherein while we have taken care of the economy, we have taken care of the energy, but then, yeah, the environment side, because it has been pretty bad. So it has increased the health of the nation has actually deteriorated. And that's from the air, and this is from the waterborne diseases. Many children die of diarrhea and different waterborne diseases. So the number of deaths have been pretty large. So the number of cases, and these are the deaths, they have been pretty large in the country because of the waterborne diseases. So all of these are actually tied together, right? So the economy on one side, then the energy on the other side, and the environment on the third side. And so the well-being. So that's the reason why I introduced the definition of the green economy, which said like well-being of the nation. Now, what is well-being? Having good health and also like access to all the resources, right? So we know that we don't, as a nation, we are not having good health, and we have been suffering because we are polluted our waterways, despite the fact that there is something positive to the growth story. So now coming to the climate change picture, yes, energy and climate change are very directly related to each other. So you see that we have been having like variation in the rainfall and the annual temperature. And then definitely, yes, there is something positive because of all the energy reforms, subsidy reforms that India has taken care. So now the good side of the story is that the percentage share of renewable energy production is actually increasing. That means we are phasing out the conventional fuels and we are emphasizing more on the renewable side of the story. Okay. So that's a positive thing of the reforms and positive things to tell about the growth story. And another positive, and there is, as I mentioned, there's a direct relationship between your income of the nation, which is measured as GDP per capita, and your carbon dioxide emissions per capita. Now you see here, this is the GDP per capita, and this is the carbon dioxide emissions per capita. So from this, we can say that the carbon dioxide emissions per capita has more or less stabilized after 2010, despite the fact that the income of the nation has increased. That means either we are using better, maybe we have improved the resource efficiency over here, right? That's where the green economy comes into play. So maybe there has been a structural break even within the energy industry, structural change, wherein you are trying to improve the process, trying to improve the energy efficiency, reuse, recycle, and all that are being taking care of the carbon emissions. So that's where like the role of energy comes in plugging the gap between, at least in the context of the climate change, right? And then, so we have this target and install capacity of renewable energy. We have a huge target, and this is the install capacity. We are very far off from the target for the solar. Wind, of course, we are not so far because, but bioenergy, we have reached whatever is the target. Bioenergy has its own limitations. Then we have the small hydro, and so you see that there's still a lot of scope for increasing the scope of the solar energy in Indian economy. Okay, so these are once we have achieved this target, I think the further we are able to cut down the emissions, especially in the context of climate change. CO2 emissions will be at the minimal. Now, you asked me to talk about what are the barriers and challenges. Now, I want to speak in the context of one of the studies we have done in the context of the green buildings. Like, green buildings is also like, the construction sector is one of the largest, has a large footfall in terms of energy consumption as well as emissions, right? And there is the construction sector has been sorted as an is very important mitigation option. So because if you look at the emission intensity, the buildings or the construction sector has a scope to reduce the emissions by at least 20 to 25% by 2050. Okay, so under the nationally determined contributions. And we also have another program called the Smart Cities program in India. So all of these are aimed at achieving the energy efficiency. And so this is one of the important mitigation options, just because to cut down green buildings, try to cut down the energy among the other material, and also improve on or reduce the material use. Okay. And so the potential for green building, or like they have definitely, they would curtail further buildup of the greenhouse gases through the material substitution, and also like energy efficient technologies. The scope for energy conservation, waste treatment, low emissions, etc. And in India, we have like, there is a rating system. Two rating systems are followed, which are Griha and LEED, so that, they tell you whether the building is green or not. But then when we look at the, while it is very easy to say that, okay, you have green buildings, and then we looked at the barriers. Now, why are people not adopting this practice? Like, why are they not buying green buildings, or why is this not still a big concept? So we did find that there are various complexities and high degree of conflicting priorities involving multiple stakeholders. That's where the challenges to the green economy come from. I would briefly talk about the various stakeholders and what kind of challenges and differences in their interests come into play here. Now, if you look at the construction sector, obviously, you know that there are various stakeholders, right? Now, if you look at the developer or an investor and builder, for them, the objective, for them, the main criteria, if they have to achieve how much has they achieved, they look at rupees per square feet, or they have risk reward ratio. They look at return on investment, whether or not the property has resale value. That's basically the indicators they use. Now, if you're a developer or investor or a builder, now for them, the challenge in the adoption of green practices is basically the energy cost, or just one of the costs, right? And then because there are other costs which are involved in the green buildings. And then there is also, like, you don't look at the life cycle cost. I buy the building now, but I really do not see like how much energy conservation is achieved over a period of time till I stay in this particular building. That is not done. So that's one of the main challenge in the adoption of the green practices. And then the other, the disincentives for them are like, if you are talk anything about green, there is a high investment made in the buildings. And then you're putting high investment, but they do not actually fetch you high resale value or higher rents, right? Because a tenant or the obviously would like to cut down on their costs. So that is a disincentive for them to adopt green building or to. Now, if you're an occupant, obviously, like which are commercial occupant, you're opening it for any of the IT firm or whatever. They look at the increased employee satisfaction and productivity. Whether or not in this environment workers are able to work productively or not is their question, rather than whether the building is green or not. They also look at long-term comfort, low operation and maintenance costs. So, but then the challenges that the occupants face is they will not have any knowledge about the innovations and technology. I like the building, I stay, and I really don't care how much of energy saving is it giving me, right? And so because the disincentive for them is the invisibility of the green element. Now, I can say that green element means like there is rainwater harvesting, constructed this at using local materials. There is like you can cut down your electricity cost by certain percentage and all that. But then that becomes invisible, as a result of which it becomes a main challenge to the adaptation of any of the green infrastructure or right. Now, if you look at the architects and interior designers, they look at aesthetics and they want like visual and space planning and all this. But then they want something which is more, which can be flexible enough to change the design. But they will not be bothered about whether or not the building is green, right? So they want, this becomes a potential challenge for the architects and the interior designers. Now, for engineers, the performance is like watts per square meter or kilowatt ton, how much of energy is being consumed. But then when you talk about it's, you're looking at the multiple projects, they don't interact with different departments, right? Their job is done, they give you the design and they tell the structural features and then they leave, right? And they are not even at the beginning of the planning process. They join sometime later, as a result of which though they have an idea, that's where their role is not actually projected completely. And then for them, they get their fee. And so as a percentage of capital cost of the project. So for them, it's it's reverse oversizing. Now, if I actually, because as a percentage I get of the cost. So for me, if I oversize, I get more money. So I would have more incentive to actually not implement that particular innovative design. So that becomes a disincentive. And then you talk about the contractors and subcontractors who are also some of the stakeholders. So for them, like, because they're only a contractor, right? They do not have any long-term interest. For them, it's a profit is a motive. And so they just do the job and they leave. So that's basically because there is some kind of relational breakdown. So that also like would not incentivize them to adopt any of the green practices. And then you come to the project managers who are critical. But then they are more responsible for, I mean, if I'm a project manager, I actually look at the familiarity of the process. I only look for a person who is familiar with the process, and that person is used to certain design and technique, and he becomes inflexible, right? Because project managers' job is to get the job done, and they do not want any kind of delay in implementation, right? So all of these, so there is, in this particular case, there's a tendency to follow the rules of the thumb. So these are some of the challenges which get buried when we say, like, we have to adopt certain, and these become actually barriers. Okay. So when we looked at the study and we surveyed all the stakeholders, we are trying to understand different barriers. And then what we saw is that there are so many barriers to adoption of green technologies in India. They can be put as a policy and information barriers. You can talk about financial and economic barriers, information promotion and education barriers, managerial and organizational barriers. So what are these policy and information barriers? For example, obviously there are no economic incentives to adopt, or there is weak enforcement of, say, building codes. That's one example. The green rating mechanisms are not very popular. So you talk about the Energy Star. It should be popular. Only then that particular technology can. But then if something is Green Star and it is priced very high, then I would not have incentive to buy, right? So lack of significant demand and supply of green technologies in the market. Now you also have high financial and economic barriers like high capital costs, difficulty in accessing financial capital for green investment, high payback period and low returns on green buildings. And the investors and the occupants belonging to two different categories, right? I'm an investor, I may be interested in green building, but as a tenant, I may not be interested. I just need a house, right? Similarly, as I mentioned, lack of expertise in life cycle costing, high information cost due to lack of labeling. These becomes information barriers. So we need to overcome this information barrier in order for the green technology to actually penetrate in the market. So some of the managerial and organizational barriers are, as I already talked about, there are a lot of economic incentives to actually adopt certain technology. And there are also like schedule conflicts and time delays, strict norms about the capital budget, and fear of overrunning, because most of the time the budgets are fixed and you do not really want to overshoot the budget because of limited, and sometimes green technologies can be more expensive, right? And you also want to sticking on day-to-day routine and you just do not want to change. That becomes a managerial and organizational barrier. So all of these actually impede the takeoff of the green economy in India, the green technologies and all. So you need to like cross these barriers, and single policy would not actually work. So what you need is judicious mix of economic instruments, right? Like taxes, subsidies, soft loans, etc. And you also need reduction in barriers or market penetration of green technologies. You need markets, right? Most of the time you might have very nice idea, but it cannot take off in the market. If it can't take off, then the idea gets buried. That's where you need the holding hand. And the eco-labeling, green leases, these are all examples on overcoming the information failures in the green technologies. We also have adoption of life cycle perspective. So we really need to adopt this cradle to the grave approach, right from the inception till the end, how much of the energy saving is possible. So that's a life cycle perspective, that's essential. And of course, the role of green financing is absolutely vital, because the financing is a very, very crucial aspect, right? If there are no finances, there cannot be any technologies, new technologies developed. So that becomes another important feature or opportunity and challenge for adoption of the green technologies in India. So I would be happy to take any doubts.
Thank you, ma'am, especially for
Yeah.
highlighting the non-technical perspective for energy transition. And there are some questions in the chat, so I will put them forth.
Yeah.
The first question is, how do we draw a moral line between economic well-being and the impact in the environment?
Sorry, just a minute. How do I get back to the main screen? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Tell me. What's the question?
How do we draw a moral line between economic well-being and the impact in the environment?
How do we draw it? So one factor is, like, you need to grow as much as it does not impact the environment. For example, if it's a renewable resource, now you can consume as much of the resource as much you can grow, right? You should not go beyond the what you can actually grow. And in case of non-renewable resource, the example is, if I'm actually depleting this particular resource, I know that this life is going to come to an end. But by the time this particular resource comes to an end, I should be able to create the additional resource which would carry on the same function as this. Then in that particular case, even if this resource depletes, it will not impact my well-being in future, right? So for other air pollutants, we should, as far as the low carbon technologies or the shunya, the zero energy, all of these need to be, so we should actually keep the emissions at the minimal for the well-being. So that's the only way through which we can achieve this win-win scenarios.
Thank you, ma'am. The next question is, looking at a micro level, what do you think should be done to promote shareholders to look at green indicators when judging a company's performance?
So that's where the role of information comes into play, right? Now, the moment you start ranking the companies based on maybe green, red, black, right? So I know I get a fair idea about whether or not this particular company is following all the environment guidelines or not. The information disclosure is a must. Now, if there is no information disclosure, as a shareholder, I would not get to know how this company is actually doing, right? So information disclosure should be made mandatory. So then automatically, like, it gets inbuilt into the shareholders. They know that at one day the company would be penalized for its, right, for not adhering to the environmental norms. So that's the solution, is the information disclosure to whatever ways. Yeah.
Another question, what are your views in green taxes? Will it have a big negative impact on FDI?
So the taxes, yes, they do have distortionary impact on the economy. But the reason why the taxes are imposed are mostly like in cases where, because that becomes a revenue generating mechanism for the governments. And secondly, like, if a company or firm feels that the taxes are pretty high vis-a-vis, suppose I have an abatement technology which is available, which can control the pollution. So if the taxes are pretty high compared to the cost of abatement, I would actually abate and not pay the taxes. So that gives me an incentive to actually adopt a pollution control technology. So taxes have their role to play, and that's the reason why carbon taxes have been very popular all over the world. I mean, for the administrators, especially because that becomes a revenue sharing mechanism or revenue generating mechanism. So they like the taxes part. But I agree, they do have a lot of distortionary impacts on the economy. Yeah.
And the last question, how difficult is it for a company to calculate its green indicators?
It is not difficult at all. At least, like, now there are various green rating projects which are going on, wherein the company sustainability metrics are being worked out. So you need to have the triple bottom line approach, wherein you're taking care of the social capital, you're also taking care of the environmental capital, and also the productive capital, which also includes human capital. So all the whatever like impacts you are generating on the environment should be accounted for, and it is definitely not difficult. And of late, there is a lot of trust. Actually, there is a green business coalition, and green businesses are actually coming up. So they are actually talking about sustainability metrics and measurement of them. So they would actually rate the firm's performance based on the sustainability metrics on the environment. So that's not difficult. Yeah, now there are various consultancy firms which are actually doing this sustainability metrics for the firms.
Thank you, ma'am. Thanks a lot for highlighting the economic perspective for energy transition. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. It's been great to have you all here. And please do discuss everything that was discussed today on the Discord server as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah.